The bear gazed at the small child with glowing wide eyes. Saliva and blood oozed from its gaping jaws as it took deep breaths of air into its lungs, anticipating its next move. The 12-year-old boy seemed so harmless and so gentle, so non-threatening as he looked on down the river, casting out another lure into the slow-moving water. The boy before him, George Halfkenny, 16, went down easy. The bear approached him from behind in a similar position, stalking him silently through the thick weeds and tackled him to the ground, wrapping its jaws around his neck and snapping it instantaneously. The boy was paralyzed and unable to breathe as the bear dragged his skinny little body away about 30 yards back and into a small cache it dug, shitting and pissing on his corpse, not quite knowing what to do with it at the time, but to defend it, to guard it, as the body was now the predator's prized possession. But there were two others, Mark, George's brother, and Billy Reindress, 15, a stone's throw down the riverbank. Unknowing of the horror that has already struck, the boys continued casting into the dark water, awaiting, perhaps, their dire fate or redemption. What's up, guys? Iceman here. So, this is a true story of a large Bruin black bear that had its way with 3 young men. And I warn you, it's a rather chilling one indeed. But before I get into it, I'd like to thank you guys and gals for all your support on this channel. And if you will, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit the bell so you're notified next time I post a video. And if you want to support me further, you can become a channel member or a patron. Links in the description below. So let's get into this chilling tale. George and Mark Halfkenny were country boys. They loved the outdoors, and as early teenagers had more freedom than they could ask for. They would hunt squirrels with their .22 rifles not far from Radiant Lake in Algonquin Provincial Park, Ontario. George, for the first time in his life, had a girlfriend. They attended high school together, and he would impress her and her family with sunfish and perch that he would pull from the Radiant River. His friend from down the road, Billy, joined him on that horrific day. It was the middle of May. School was almost out for the summer, and the boys had their whole lives ahead of them. Black bears in the area were common. Billy's father would hunt them for their hides and make jerky from their meat. The boys knew to stay away from them and the dangers they could possess. A mild winter that year, without much snowfall, caused the lack of berries and food sources for the animals. Much competition compounded this issue, as most predators survived the winter, who otherwise may have died off. The 3 boys' laughter and joy engulfed the area as they ran up and down the riverbank barefooted, taking in the warm sun of the early day, making jokes and whistling as they joyously fished the river. They each had their own pail in which they kept the fish, so they split up and blanketed the area with cast after cast. It was a harrowing day, a tragic nightmare that came to fruition like a thief in the night. And after caching away George's feeble body, covering it with urine and feces, breathing heavily, the bear looked on and took notice to the other young child, Mark, just up the riverbank. The 2 remaining boys were oblivious to the brutal murder that just recently took place in their vicinity. The boys still laughed and whistled and joked about their day. The bear could hear their high-pitched voices, alluring the predator even more so. The sounds of the weak and fragile. The sounds of the blossoming embodiment of man that just wasn't quite mature enough in nature to defend itself. Not yet. And the bear most likely picked up on this reality. Little Mark could hear something moving through the weeds. He turned to the sight of trees and brush and could have sworn he saw something large moving through it, only to come to a halt as he looked on. He turned back to check his lure, only to hear the sound again of something thrusting toward him. "Billy? Is that you?" the youngster shouted, but no answer. "Billy!" he shouted again, and he received a response, but it was from far down the bank, nowhere close to whatever was lurking in the midst of him. He picked up his pail and began walking down the bank towards Billy's voice, and somewhere in the dark of that moment, his life was taken from him. Several minutes later, Billy Reindress, 15, grew concerned. He hadn't heard the laughter or bragging from his friends in some time, and things grew eerie. The chirping of the birds dissipated. Everything around him grew quiet and still, aside from the moving water of the river. "George! Mark!" he shouted, and to no answer. He held his pole in one hand and his pail in the other, and began walking down the bank toward where he last heard Mark call out for him. He could almost hear his friends' blood screaming from the ground as he approached the hideous scene of the bear digging into young Mark's mangled corpse. Billy froze in terror as he witnessed the creature digging its yellow, bacteria-ridden claws into little Mark's abdomen region, prying apart the gaping wound in which it inflicted, pulling out the young boy's intestines. Billy couldn't believe the horror he was witnessing as he clenched his fingers tightly around his fishing pole and screamed. The high-pitched noise and piercing sounds of his voice took the bear's attention, and it lifted its massive head out of the young boy's belly and soullessly gazed into Billy's terror-filled eyes, still chewing on his friend's innards as blood and guts oozed and dripped from its mouth. The bear quickly turned toward Billy and pursued him, this time fully confident in its ability to take down human prey after effortlessly killing the two before him. Billy couldn't move as the bear lurched toward him, but just in time his instincts kicked in and he raised his fishing pole up over his head and swung at the bear with full force. The fishing pole hissed through the air and lashed across the bear's face, but only to invigorate the creature. It stood up on its hind legs to approach the boy, and with one single swipe across his skinny chest, knocked him to the ground. He gasped for air as the creature stood over him. Suddenly, a gunshot sounded in the distance, and the bear hesitated as it looked on toward the sound, giving Billy a chance to get to his feet. But to no avail. The bear surged toward him, wrapping its arms around him like a wrestler and taking him back to the ground. Billy tried to cover his face, but the bear pried apart his nimble hands and wrapped its jaws around his face. Spit and saliva drained into Billy's mouth as the bear huffed and grunted while attempting to pull him away into the brush. Billy fought vigilantly, with his face still stuck between the bear's jaws, digging his fingernails into the creature, pulling out cusps of fur and blood, but it only seemed to aggravate it more. With determination, the bear dragged him about 40 yards down a ravine, and Billy smelled a foul odor as they approached the scene of death. With blood pouring down his forehead and bleeding face against the hard-packed dirt, he discovered the heinous scene of his fate. There, before him, was Mark's mangled corpse, with large hunks taken out of his neck and center region. He looked like a pale, bloodied, and ripped-up doll, and the stench was otherworldly. The bear managed to crush Billy's skull and cached his body not far from Mark's, but refused to eat him, and only paced between the two recently deceased young men, as if it were unsure of what to do next, but to defend them. It wasn't until late in the evening their bodies were discovered, after the boys didn't come home for supper, and their fathers went out looking for them. They took notice to an aggressive black bear, and chills were sent down their spines as they realized what could have come of the boys. The men rushed back home and grabbed their rifles and shot the bear, dead on sight. And there, not far from its body, lay the bodies of Mark and Billy, one half buried and eaten, the other with his face crushed inward. It wasn't until the following day that George's corpse was found, about 50 yards from the others, hidden in thick weeds and half buried. The radiant river was never the same again, and some legends say that the boys can still be heard, laughing and whistling as they fish on some quiet, early summer evenings. Jeez, what do you guys and gals think about this hideous bear attack? I remember reading about this one some time ago, but I just didn't quite have it in me to cover it. I really don't like covering the stories that involve young adults or children, but at the same time, it is important to have this sort of awareness and perspective. I don't have children of my own, but if I did, I would certainly be very cautious of them going out into bear country without supervision. It just seems to be something that is often underlooked. My wife and I actually know a couple who we follow on Facebook who live not far from us in black bear country, and they actually posted a photo of the sandbox they have in their backyard for their children to play in. And the photo they posted was that of a bear track imprinted in the sandbox. And it really did send chills down my spine. And to be honest, I don't know if they still let their kids play out there alone or not. But I feel that if it were me, I sure wouldn't. But the reason I think people lose sight of this is probably because of the fact that these instances are rare, but nonetheless, they do happen. But let me know in the comments below what could have been done differently to avoid this situation. And do you think you would trust your child out in bear country, even if it's just black bear country, for example? Or would you not let that slide? Let me know in the comments below your thoughts on these matters. And if you haven't yet, paw that like button, as it really helps my channel. And blessings to my patrons and channel members. Thank you for making these videos possible. I will talk to you all soon with more chilling tales from the Iceman.